For sure. Yeah, I can definitely go through the processing workflow. And actually, yeah, we can start with that, and then as more people join, we can switch to other things as well. So what I'm gonna do is, uh, there we go. Okay, yeah, you should be able to see my actual screen now. And these are some of the recent images that I'd taken. So this was my most recent image. There we go. So that was the Crescent Nebula. Move my chat window up here. This is 100% view. There we go. Yeah, that was my most recent one. And is the audio still pretty clear? Can you hear me okay? And in this particular image, right over here on the left of the frame, that was the bubble nebula, the soap bubble actually, not the bubble nebula, the soap bubble. So that was the very, very faint one that was just discovered in 2008. And yeah, in terms of my processing workflow, I process everything in PixInsight. And what software are you using, Khaled? Do you also use PixInsight or something else? So the actual Crescent Nebula over here, that was caused by this star in the center, the bright one. This is a Wolf-Rayet star. It's a very, very hot, energetic star. And it released some very, very fast solar wind, which was moving outwards very fast. And it collided with some material outside, which was from a previous ejection of gas, something like 250 to 400,000 years ago. So when that faster moving gas from this star collided with the outer slower moving gas, those shock waves ended up causing this. So the actual material was ejected by the star in the center over here. And likely the star is going to explode at some point. It is reaching that stage of its life, which is likely why we're seeing these shells of gas being ejected from it. Yes, DSS, Lightroom, and Affinity Photo. It looks like we have another question there from David. Is there a camera that would work well with both a 91mm refractor and the 11-inch SCT? I was thinking the SI 294 MC Pro. So David, that's a good question. The 294 MC Pro is a great camera. It would technically work with both, but I find that I mean, it would work great with the FLT91, but with the C11, the focal length of the scope is too long. So if we end up pulling up one of these, let me just pull up a website. This is how I normally check my cameras, or I check compatibility for cameras. So there's this website, astronomy.tools, or you can just find it by Googling CCD suitability calculator. So you can just put C11 Edge HD here for the telescope, for the camera, ASI 294. And what that tells you is based on the focal length of the scope and the pixel scale of the scope, the resolution that you get is 0.34 arc seconds per pixel, which is very, very fine. So it's a little bit too zoomed in. And according to the chart down here, the ideal pixel size in OK seeing or in good seeing would be about 0.33 to 1 arc second per pixel. So this is a little on the like oversampled, sorry, undersampled. No, just thinking. No, it is oversampled. So it's a little bit too zoomed in for that telescope. Now, in reality, I try to keep this value above about 0.7 arc seconds per pixel. and ideally above 1 arc second per pixel. So that way, even if the seeing isn't amazing, you can still get good results. So I don't really recommend a C11 for imaging most of the time. The focal length is just way too long. If you do use one of those 0.7 focal reducers, which is what I use sometimes, the focal length goes down to 2000 millimeters instead of 2800 millimeters. And if we select that here, so now you're at 0.49 arc seconds per pixel. That is still way too zoomed in, way too oversampled. So if you can bring that closer to about 1 arc second per pixel, that would be better. So even with the ASI 294, which has fairly long pixels, I don't really recommend imaging with a C11 that way. What I do recommend though is using a Hyperstar adapter. That's what I have for my C11 Edge. So if you are using a Hyperstar adapter with the ASI 294, actually it would be this one here, then you would be at 1.77 arc seconds per pixel. So that's fairly zoomed out. Yep, exactly. So that would be with the Hyperstar V4 from Starizona, and 1.77 arc seconds per pixel. That is good. You get fairly good detail in most of the objects, and you can fit all the larger objects within your field of view. Even the Andromeda Galaxy would fit just fine in that field of view. So yeah, the Hyperstar is amazing. I would highly recommend that. And imaging at f2 is much easier than imaging at f7 or f10, and it'll be much easier on your mount because there aren't many mounts, at least under about $6,000-7,000 that can handle a C11. Yeah, that was that was a good point. You definitely read my mind there. So the ASI 294 is a great camera, but just still the pixels are too small for the C11 without a Hyperstar. And so yeah, this is a very good site from Astronomy Tools. So the CCD suitability calculator, and then they also have a field of view calculator, which tells you how big objects would be um, in your scope, so you can switch to imaging mode and then put your camera and stuff there. Oh yeah, the SIM 70G, very good mount. So actually that mount would be able to handle the C11 at f7. It would be okay, but I think the seeing would still be a problem in most places around the world. For example, if I'm imaging, so something like this, if I set that to 100%, so this object with my ASI 1600 and C11 Edge with Hyperstar, this is what it looks like at regular 100% resolution. So that's quite detailed, and I didn't have to deal with the seeing issues too much. Some nights the seeing was pretty bad, so I didn't end up getting any data, but most of the nights, because I wasn't too oversampled like this, it wasn't a problem. But if you are using a C11 without the Hyperstar, you'd be at something like this, and it would take you 10 times longer to get this much signal to noise ratio, even at f7. Yeah, Khaled, this site does actually work with DSLRs as well. So if we go back to the previous page, which is the CCD suitability calculator, depending on the DSLR you're using, if you're using, let's say, a Canon, actually it would be in the camera. So it has all the different Canon cameras listed over here. So if you're using, let's say, a Canon, this is a T3i, I believe. Yeah, and so Canon T3i, and then you just put your scope over here, or you just put the focal length. So if your scope has a focal length of let's say 900 millimeters, or let's say 700 millimeters, so all you need to do is either select your scope or put the focal length and the Nikon D300. And what's the focal length of your telescope? I remember I saw it last time, but I can't quite remember. But let's say if it's around 700 millimeters, it still tells you you're at about 1.62 arc seconds per pixel. Yeah, that's pretty good. That will be pretty close in terms of size. It'll be pretty close to about this. Now, since your scope itself is a little bit smaller, oh yes, 910 millimeters. So we can put that in here. So you're at 1.25 arc seconds per pixel. So your zoom level will be something like about this. So this is the zoom level that you'll be at. But you will have to expose for longer to get the same amount of signal to noise ratio because your scope's lens is smaller than the mirror of the scope that I was using. But yeah, definitely. So yeah, you're at 1.25 arc seconds per pixel. That's pretty good. Anything over 1 is great. Anything over about 0.7 arc seconds per pixel is pretty good for general seeing. If you're living on the top of a mountain in Chile, or you're in the Atacama Desert, then you don't have to worry as much about seeing. So then you can go down to 0.4, 0.5 arc seconds per pixel and image with a C11 at f10, but in most places in the world, the seeing is not going to be that great. And then using the same website, if you go up here to the field of view calculator, you can do the same thing. Just switch over to imaging mode, and then you can select whatever target, so M31, for example, and you can put your scope here again, and then your camera. Oh, let's go D300S. So once we put this stuff in here, under you just click add to view, and it'll tell you aperture. Yeah, that won't really make a difference, but yeah, what you need is your camera and your telescope. So as you can see, the Andromeda Galaxy will be a little bit big for your telescope, but most of the good stuff is near the center. So this will tell you how different objects will fit into the field of view of your telescope. So this is just the field of view calculator on astronomy tools. David, okay, so your mount has a guide scope with a camera, and you wanted to use the iPolar, so you can use the iPolar software, but you wanted to use Nina for alignment, and Nina doesn't recognize the guide camera. I don't know if the iPolar software, so the iPolar might be using some proprietary drivers that don't have like an ASCOM driver equivalent. So in that case, I think that might be the case. You might have to use iPolar for polar alignment with the SEM70. I haven't looked into that before, but I do have a strong feeling that you might be limited to using the iPolar software instead of being able to use Nina like a regular guide camera. But generally, I found that as long as your polar alignment is close enough, it's fine. It doesn't have to be 100% on point. If you're off by an arc minute or two, that's fine. It doesn't make a difference if you're guiding, especially. If you're not guiding, then yeah, I would try to get as accurate as possible. And thanks, Khaled. I'm glad you found that helpful. Just going to get an update on the chat. Oh yeah, perfect. Do you know what guide camera you're thinking of getting, David? Because I know I know ZWO had just released the ASI 220 as well, which was one of their newer guide cameras that I was thinking of looking at too. So this was my most recent image, or my most recent image of the Triangulum Galaxy, Messier 33. So you get tons and tons of hydrogen alpha regions there. Oh yeah, I just put it in the chat. So this is the one here, ASI 220mm Mini. So this one specializes in guiding. So pretty well priced at about 249. And this is a monochrome camera. So if you're primarily just going to be using it for guiding, this should be a pretty nice camera. So I'm looking at that right now. Um, so the specs seem pretty good. Very low read noise. QE is quite good. I'm just wondering what the resolution is. Oh yeah, pixel size. So pixel size is zero point 0.4 microns, which is a little bit bigger than I like for guiding, um, especially if you end up wanting to get or end up using it with a scope with a longer focal length. Um, so yeah, everything else about this camera is pretty good, but just that the pixel size is a little bit big. So I'm gonna keep looking at options as well. I haven't really looked at the newest batch of cameras that ZWO has released yet. So they do have quite a few different options. So guide cameras or planetary cameras, you can use any of them. They all work pretty well. Personally, I like some of those skinnier guide cameras, and I know that QHY has some right now, but from ZWO, they've only got a couple of models, and the ASI 120 is a little bit too old. The ASI 174, a little expensive and a little bit old. The 290mm is actually really good. So if you want some super sensitive guide camera, this monochrome guide camera is good. And the reason I like these kinds of these 1.25-inch ones is that it's much easier to find focus if you have one of those older guide scopes that doesn't have a focuser built in, like a helical focuser. But if your guide scope has that, then it's fine. You can just get any of these cameras, and yeah, pretty much any of them will do a good job. I just use a cover camera, the 462, and oh yeah, for sure. Thanks, Ryan. I'm glad you could join us. But yeah, the one I'm currently using is the QHY version, the QHY 462. This one over here. But I use it for planetary imaging as well as for guiding. So I use it for both, which is why I'm getting a second camera now. But I'm still thinking about which one to get. Actually, I might end up with the ASI 662 or the QHY 662. But yeah, I should make another video about that once I've done enough research on that topic. The guide scope is rotating as you slew. As long as the guide scope is attached to the telescope and it's moving, at the same time as the telescope, the orientation of the camera stays the same. That should be fine. Um, Let me just see what the question is here. Uh, so um, so one thing I've realized over time is that your polar alignment and your go to an object, those are two separate things. So your go to largely depends on a couple of different factors, whether there's any backlash in your mount, and how accurately you have plates solved and things like that. But polar alignment generally determines how accurately your mount is going to track. Because if your polar alignment is off, then your mount is going to start drifting in declination usually. So polar alignment, even if it's not super accurate, but your go-to has been calibrated accurately, or you've done a plate solve, then your mount will go to the object properly. But yeah, if your mount isn't going to the right place, it could be unrelated to polar alignment as well. And generally your guide scope will rotate along with the main scope. So if your guide scope is on top of your main telescope, as your main telescope turns or rotates, the guide scope will usually rotate with it. So then that should stay in alignment. The alignment of the guide scope itself shouldn't change. But I will definitely make another video afterwards about what guide cameras I recommend once I do enough research and figure out which one I'm going to be buying as well. Because yeah, I'm definitely in the market for one too. Now the planets are coming up as well soon, so one of my goals is to do some more planetary imaging. And normally my QHY 462 is tied up with guiding, so I don't get to do planetary imaging with that one at the same time. So let me see what I've got over here. So yeah, I've been trying to do some planetary imaging as well right now. This was, no, that's an old image. Oh yeah, this was one of the recent images that I had taken of Jupiter with my guide camera. And Jupiter is getting pretty high up in the sky, and Mars is also getting higher up in the sky. So it is time to start getting ready for planetary season. Okay. So when you initially, I'm guessing with the eye polar, you would take an initial image and then the scope would move to a different point or rotate, and then it would take a second image. So in that case, when you do a go to or your scope moves somewhere, then it your alignment will appear to change, but what matters is that initial alignment. So if you turn on your eye polar and you take that initial image for alignment, then it tells you to move the star to a certain place, and then your scope rotates and then you move it to that place. Then your alignment is good. After that, you can just turn off eye polar. You don't need it after that initial alignment, because if you do a go to some other place, then yeah, the star will seem to have moved out of there, but your polar alignment, which you initially did, will be unaffected. So I wouldn't rely on the eye polar once you've done a go to some other place. And if you're guiding, that little bit of change, even if there is any change in your polar alignment, shouldn't matter. Because at most that might be 10 20 arc seconds, and as long as your initial polar alignment that you did is within about an arc minute or two, you're fine. And Khalid, yeah, this image was actually not with the C11. This one was with the 16-inch f5, that big knob that I have. Um, and in this case, I was limited by the seeing anyway, because Jupiter was between 30 and 35 degrees up. So I was severely limited by the seeing. So the C11 would have done just as good a job. I don't think that using a larger scope gave me any real benefit in this case. But once Jupiter gets higher up in the sky, then yeah, once Jupiter gets higher up in the sky, like 60 degrees, which you will in about 2 years, then using the bigger scope will have an advantage over the C11. So this was at, my scope itself is 2000 millimeters. So it's a 16-inch f5 Newtonian reflector. And I was using a 2.5x power mate. So that brings it to 5000 millimeters. So this image was taken at 5000 millimeters. And yeah, so I was using my guide camera for this one. I use the same camera for guiding and for planetary imaging. So it's I'll just put the name in the chat here. So I put the name of the camera in the chat. It is the QHY 462C. ZWO also makes one of those. It's the ASI 462C from ZWO. So that's what I was using. I just took it off my imaging scope, which is the C11 with Hyperstar, and I just put it on the Newtonian reflector, and I took a video, and then I took a few videos and then I stacked them afterwards. So I use the same camera, but I want to be able to do planetary imaging and deep sky imaging at the same time. So that's why I'm looking for a second camera now. but pretty much any camera you have can get good images. Last time I'd gotten some images of the planet Mars. This was 2 years ago, and I'm going to reprocess the data because I know I can do a better job. So this was Mars in October 2020. And at that time, I was still figuring out what I was doing. So I think if I reprocess that data now, I can probably do a better job. So over here, you can see Valles Marineris um, down here. That is the Grand Canyon on Mars. And you can see the north and south polar caps. And you can see some of those large like continents and mountain ranges. So this was with the C11 Edge. So I was using a 3x Barlow at the time, and I was using my regular imaging camera, which is the ASI 1600 mm. So I'd gotten this image with my ASI 1600. So pretty much any camera can be a planetary camera, even a deep sky camera. So all you have to do is you have to select the region of interest, which is instead of using the entire frame, you just crop down to a smaller part of the frame, and that increases the frame rate. So with my ASI 1600, if I use the region of interest and crop down, instead of getting, let's say, 20 frames per second, I can get about 100 frames per second. But the reason I don't use my ASI 1600 for planetary imaging is because it's already being used for deep sky imaging, and I don't like to keep taking cameras off and on and all that. So I prefer to just leave the cameras on there once they're on there. So that's why I like to. I mean, planetary cameras are pretty cheap, so that's why I'm just okay just buying another camera instead of swapping the ASI 1600 or the QHY back and forth to different scopes for planetary imaging. But Mars is actually getting higher again. I think it's December 1st when it's going to be closest to the Earth for the next 2 years. So for anybody who wants to image Mars, December, early December or late November will be your best shot. So it's fairly small. I think it's going to get to about 17 arc seconds this time instead of 22 arc seconds, which is what it was the last time that when I imaged it here. But even at 17 arc seconds, it's pretty good. It's going to get very, very bright. It'll be at magnitude minus 1.9. So Mars is going to get quite bright, and whatever scope you have, just put a Barlow in there, and whatever camera you're using, take some 2 or 3 minute videos, and yeah, just stack them. And yeah, that's a good point, Khaled. Yeah, I like to reuse the same flats all the time. And if I don't take my camera off, there's no chance of the dust getting in. So all of these images all the deep sky images that I take, I always reuse the same flats. And as you can see, I have absolutely no issues with dust. No dust anywhere in the system, and I reuse the same flats for years sometimes, and it's mainly because I like to just keep my imaging camera where it is without taking it off all the time. Um, and if I do ever take it off, I use a dust blower to just to one of those ones people use for camera sensors. I just use one of those to blow the dust off the camera and any filters, and then I put it back together. So yeah, dust is not that much of an issue if you're careful about keeping your camera and scope and everything together in one piece. So yeah, this was the picture that I had taken of the Squid Nebula, and yeah, good point, Galen. And yeah, you'd asked about how I process some of the data as well. Um, so I use PixInsight. I did use Deep Sky Stacker in the past. So a lot of my older images were done in Deep Sky Stacker, like this one. So basically, you stack them, and when you get that final file, you just drag that over to any software like Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever you might have, or PixInsight in my case. Um, and most of them will do a pretty good job, or even GIMP. Actually, that's one that I'd used for a little while, but now I primarily I use PixInsight, so that's what I've started making tutorials for now. And I'm hoping to make more tutorials for some of the free software. I know that there's another one called Serial that I'm going to start using on the side just so I can make some tutorials about that as well. But I know for Serial, there's a really good tutorial. I'll just type the name of the software here in the chat as well. So there's a really good tutorial about that software from Sarah Matthews on YouTube, and she does a great job of going through all of that. And Serial is free; it's not as powerful as PixInsight, but it does a pretty good job. And yeah, PixInsight does actually do a really good job of that. So I just pulled up PixInsight here. This is what I use, and I'm just going to pull up one of the recent things that I was working on just to show you what it looks like. So right here. Yeah, that's a good idea. The reason Serial is better, I think, than Deep Sky Stacker is that it can do everything. So it'll stack everything, and I think you can also do some processing in there. So that way you don't have to be switching programs. And Serial is specifically designed for astrophotography. So unlike Photoshop, it does have some more specialized functions. And yeah, eventually you can also try PixInsight. They do have, I think, a 1 month trial or something around there. But that's how I started. I got that trial of PixInsight first to try it out to make sure I like it, and then once I learned a bit about it, then I decided to buy it. It's not cheap. I can't remember how much I paid for it, but considering how expensive a lot of our equipment tends to be, it's costs about the same as one eyepiece. So I think it's worth it for all the features that you get with it. And now you are starting to find more and more tutorials online as well on YouTube for PixInsight. So that makes it a lot easier to learn. And I've started making tutorials now, and I'll be making a lot more of them where I explain how to do things in a really simple way. So I loaded a lot of files at the same time over here, so it's taking a little bit longer than usual to load everything. But yeah, it should be up here in a second. I'll just show you what my most recent project looks like that I was working on there. And there we go. Okay, so this was my image of the Crescent Nebula that I was working on. So, okay, just going to organize everything here. There we go. Yeah, so this is one of the raw files. This is the G filter. And yeah, these were all the files that were stacked and spit out by PixInsight, so I could combine them all into an image and then process. So this is what the images through each of the individual filters looked like for me. So it is a bit more complicated doing it this way than using a color camera, whether it's a Canon DSLR or an ASI 294. So PixInsight has this script over here that weighted batch pre-processing. You basically drag and drop everything into it, and it ends up doing all the calibrating and stacking and everything, and then it just spits out the final image for you to start processing. So of course the final image, this is the script over here that I use for, so it loads all the different kinds of images, all the flats, darks, bias frames, lights, whatever you have, and then it gives you one of these kinds of images, and then you can and this image is of course linear, so then you have to stretch it, and um, that's then, and then you just process it the way you would in any other software like Photoshop, and then you can get your final image like this. So that's what I use for that. Okay, and yeah, speaking of astro imaging and all these targets, one website that I like to look at once in a while, just to get an idea of perspective, and I'm sure a lot of people have already seen that. I'm just going to refresh it. So this one here is called htwins.net scale 2. Yeah, Okay, yeah, certainly. So Khaled, I do process those stacked images in PixInsight. Yeah, I do everything in PixInsight. So all the way from um, so starting from just loading all the calibration frames and then stacking them all and doing the noise reduction and processing. So A to Z, everything I do in PixInsight. So whatever you can think of in terms of astronomy, PixInsight can do that. The only thing it doesn't do or that it's not specialized in is planetary imaging. So it won't be able to stack or calibrate planetary images, but if you've created your planetary images in some other software, you can always drag them into PixInsight for final touches. But that's the only thing that it can't do. But anything related to deep sky imaging, you can do it all in PixInsight. So in that way, it's kind of like Cyril, but much better. I mean, much more powerful. It depends on your level of usage. So one thing I noticed when I first got PixInsight is that my images didn't get any better compared to using, um, let's say, compared to using Deep Sky Stacker and GIMP. It was because I didn't really know how to use PixInsight at the time. So the main advantage of PixInsight, you notice uh, once you've used it for a little while, once you've learned how to use it. So that's when you start to notice the real advantages of PixInsight. So using some of the other free software, like would I be able to get an image like this? I could probably get fairly close, but probably I could probably get to about 90% of this. But that extra 10%, PixInsight really helps with that. So this was the Cave Nebula there. And oh yeah, so it was this little website that I'd come into, I'd found recently. It's called The Scale of the Universe. And this is just an interesting little one that I, I was looking at today, so I just wanted to share. So this basically gives you an idea of how big some of these objects are that we look at or that we image as astrophotographers. So, this is a basketball, a human, an elephant, T-Rex, giraffe. This is how big the Apollo lunar landing module was. It's actually bigger than a giraffe. It was bigger than I had expected, actually. And then this is a blue whale, got a Boeing 747 there, the Titanic, the pyramids, and then Half Dome. I saw that when I visited the US a little while ago. Got Bears Rock or Uluru, the Large Hadron Collider. It's absolutely massive. It's almost the size of the base of Mount Everest. And then as we go out, you can start to, so this is Rhode Island, and then you can start to see some of these smaller uh, planetoids. And now we're going out, that's California there. We've got Italy, and now those are the size of some of these smaller or actually larger asteroids. So Ceres, which is the largest asteroid, then some of these other planetoids, and look at the size of Ganymede. This always surprises me whenever I'm looking at um, at the moons of Jupiter, particularly Ganymede over here. It always blows my mind that it's actually bigger than the planet Pluto or X-planet. It's bigger than the planet Mercury actually, which is quite amazing. So even the moons of Jupiter would be planets or would be considered planets if they weren't orbiting Jupiter. So then we've got the Earth, and oh, also surprisingly, Sirius B. This is one of those really, really small stars that I've been trying to look at for a long time with all of my telescopes, but I've never managed to. But it's only a little bit larger than the Earth, which is quite surprising for such a star that we can see from here. And this is the rest of our solar system. So, uh, and then this is our sun over here, and some of the other larger stars, and the really large stars like Betelgeuse and Mu Cephei. So the biggest one shown over here is VY Canis Majoris, but Stephenson 2-18 is even bigger actually. So yeah, now we get into the scale of the objects that we actually image as astrophotographers. So you can see how big a lot of these nebulae are, and particularly the pillars of creation. This is the object that the James Webb Space Telescope had recently imaged, and each of these pillars, which I've actually got over here. So these pillars over here are absolutely humongous. They are, let me see, okay, this image here. So this taller pillar is about 4 light years tall, which is absolutely humongous. So if our sun was somewhere here in this image, we probably wouldn't even be able to see it actually. Our entire solar system would look like the tiniest dot, smaller than a single pixel actually. So just this tall pillar is 4 light years tall. And that's right over here. And that's not even one of the bigger nebulae. So yeah, it's just the scale of these things that always astounds me and just blows my mind how big these things are that we image. And yeah, that just keeps on going. So yeah, just looking at these recent images from the James Webb Space Telescope, that's what had got me thinking about these different scales of different things. Okay, so I can let me see here. And I wanted to share what some of these raw images look like, these individual images from a camera that haven't been processed yet. This one here. So I was also imaging with my Canon DSLR recently, so I had imaged with my Canon 6D. So this was one of the images that I had taken of the Triangulum Galaxy, and this is pretty similar to what you would get from a dark site with your Nikon D300S, Khaled. So this was, I think, a single image of 2 minutes with my 135 millimeter lens. So for you, it would probably be a bit more zoomed in, something like this. So lots of objects to image, even with these with the shorter focal lengths and with the DSLR cameras. And has anyone seen the Northern Lights recently? I think there was supposed to be a pretty good Northern Lights show. Uh, I'll check spaceweather.com and see what it says. Unfortunately, it's been cloudy here. Oh, it looks like it started to dissipate now, but it was looking pretty active a few hours ago. And yeah, where I am out here in Cochrane, it is pretty cloudy right now. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get some clear skies eventually. Okay. Yeah, so if there's anything in particular, or if you have any particular questions, if you want me to um, kind of go over anything in particular in any software, whether it's Deep Sky Stacker or PixInsight, yeah, let me know. We can definitely spend some time going over that. Oh yeah, Mars is looking pretty good. I haven't um, had the chance to look at it recently. I know it's gotten a lot brighter now than it was the last time I looked at it, or the last time that I tried to image it. Um, I can see if I have any videos of Mars that I've taken recently, actually. Just going to pull it up here. Even though hard drives are pretty big these days, it just all that planetary data takes a lot of space. Um, see if I can find it. Oh yeah, it looks like I had taken some data on Mars, so I'm going to pull up one of my software. So this was a recent video that I took of Mars. This was a little while ago when Mars was not as bright. There we go. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit more if I can here. Okay, so you can see it a little bit better now, I think. So if I just play the video, you can see there was a lot of turbulence at that time. But one of the other videos might actually be better. And that was Mars just live through the telescope. I'll try a different video of Mars, see if that was any clearer. Yeah, the seeing wasn't ideal at that time either. And Mars should look better now than it did at that time when I was imaging it. So I'm going to try one more video. Yeah, it looks like the seeing actually got worse as the night went on that time instead of getting better. Yeah, this one doesn't look too bad. I'll just stack this one here quickly and see what we get. Yeah, this most recent one that I had taken. So to stack these planetary videos, if anyone's curious, this is AutoStacker. That's the software that I use. And all you have to do is select planet and click Analyze. And that's the sharpest individual frame from here. And let me see if I can. Okay, so once we've got that, what I'm going to do is just put a couple of align points on here. It's too big, some smaller align points. And then just go back here. Yeah, that all looks pretty good. Oh. Just click stack. And this usually only takes a few seconds. Or maybe about 20 seconds or so. And then we'll see what results I got for Mars. I hadn't actually stacked this one because Mars was a little bit too low at the time, so I wasn't sure if it was worth trying. But let's see what results we get. And then the software I use for sharpening these images once AutoStacker has stacked it is this one over here. So Registax, and then I'll just drag and drop that resulting image into Registax, and then we'll see what we get. There we go. It was this image over here, and here's Registax. I'll just drop that into Registax, and now we can sharpen the image a little bit to see what detail is in there. I use dyadic and Gaussian options, and it's getting a little bit sharper. There we go. Okay, the seeing wasn't great, but you can definitely see the pole over here. I think that will be the South Pole, which is brighter. You can see some of those darker surface markings, but that's about it. I can't really see much other detail right now. So once Mars gets a little bit closer to the Earth, in about a month or so, we'll start to see more detail, and it should look larger and brighter, and the seeing should be better once it's higher up in the sky. So that'll be the plan. That'll be the next imaging goal for me in terms of planetary imaging. So I'll close this. Okay, awesome. Yeah, let me know how your experience is with Zero. So I need to start trying that as well and making some videos on Zero. just because not everybody wants to use PixInsight right away. So, oh yeah, yeah, definitely better than the original fuzzy images. The software had to go through, several thousand individual frames and select the best 10% or whatever, and then stack those. So that stacking process kind of makes that final result blurry, but once we sharpen it in Registacks, you can get some pretty good detail actually. Yeah, go for it. Try it out. I think I had recently made a video on planetary imaging as well on my YouTube channel there. Um, so that's a step-by-step process on how to do it, and that provides a lot more detail than what I quickly went through today. So I would recommend checking that out if you want to try out any planetary imaging or making any time lapses. It looks like we are getting to the 1 hour mark, so I think um, I will call it a night for today. But if anyone has any questions at all, let me know. You can definitely just post them in the chat, and I can definitely stay longer. And yeah, this was one of my previous projects. This is the Andromeda Galaxy. And my favorite thing about this image was that right in the center of the image here, there is this star right near my mouse cursor. So this was Cepheid variable V1. So this is actually the star that Edwin Hubble had imaged in the 1920s. And the variation in the brightness of this Cepheid variable star is what allowed him to calculate the size of the universe, to calculate the distance to the Andromeda galaxy, which for the first time showed us that this was a galaxy outside our own galaxy. This was another island universe. And that's how we found out just how big the universe is, and that it wasn't just our own Milky Way. Because before that, people assumed that the Andromeda galaxy was just a spiral shaped nebula within our own galaxy. So I was very excited to have captured this star. I mean, I was not expecting to be able to see an individual star in the Andromeda galaxy. I mean, this is a very, very faint star, but this is one individual star in the Andromeda galaxy, so obviously it is a very, very bright and large star. And I'm sure there are a couple of other individual stars you can see as well. In some of these large clusters, some of these other ones might also be individual stars. I'd have to compare them to the Hubble image to identify them for sure. But that particular one is definitely a real individual star because I could see that on the original glass plates that Edwin Hubble had used when he had taken his initial pictures of the Andromeda galaxy with, I think it was the largest or one of the largest telescopes in the world at the time. And I think he was using the Hale telescope, which is an absolutely massive instrument. So the fact that we can take better images now with our little scopes and our cameras now than the world's top scientists 100 years ago with the world's largest telescopes. That's quite an amazing amount of progress. But yeah, I think it's time to call it a night. And thank you so much for everyone who joined. And yeah, I'll be doing another one of these after as well if there's any interest. And if anybody wants to see any particular topics discussed, whether it's processing images or planetary or whatever it is, just send me a message anytime or just comment under any of the videos here, and I'll definitely do another like question and answer session like this, and I can answer any questions you might have about astronomy or astrophotography. So again, thank you so much for joining, and have a good rest of your day. Take care, guys.